Hi, it's me, it's Seb, and I'm here to talk about one of my favorite things in the whole world, Greek mythology. So, for my annual Greek myth retelling reading this year, I read the first chapter of this big chunky thing, Ulysses over there, and then promptly gave up. Just for now. It's kind of like I realized it's a lot to do, a lot to. I have to read it very slowly, basically, and I'll get to it. I'll get to it. But I read Ulysses first chapter, and I read the Tristia by this poet, Roman poet Ovid, who this is like an autobiography of like his life in exile, and he uses lots of Greek mythology to kind of illustrate his life. He's this witty, defiant, miserable drama queen, and I love him for it. But I'm going to talk about that book later, I think, because there's just too much to say about it. Instead, I'm going to recommend to you my favorite Greek myth retellings. I didn't rank them because they're all good, like in different ways, but instead I decided to list them in order of publication. So starting off in 1990, we have the poem Omeros by Derek Walcott. This is not a strict retelling, but it's sort of like a mix of things. It's like a poet in the style of the epic poetry, like the Iliad and the Aeneid and all those things, which are like kind of famous for Greek mythology retellings. But it's sort of his characters, who are called like Achilles and Hector and Helen as well, are characters on Saint Lucia in the Caribbean, and it's a sort of Caribbean story which connects to colonialism and so on, and they're sort of replaying the events of the Iliad. They obviously have the same names as the characters from the Iliad, but there's also lots of other characters on the island. Like there's a fisherman called Philoctet, who is got a wound in his leg, just like the Philoctetes from the Trojan War also had a wound in his leg, and that sort of like the different Greek myths are pulled in, usually around the Trojan War, and the writer himself, who is from the island, also appears at some point. So it's sort of postmodern, and there's no main character. There's one bit where Achilles kind of like goes on this dream journey, imagining his ancestors being taken from Africa as slaves to the Caribbean island, and I think that sort of mirrors or echoes the hero's journey, like the Odyssey or something like that, the sea voyage kind of trope. Absolutely amazing poem, really long, like proper book length poem, but it's got so much richness in it, in the language and in the sort of the themes it explores, that it definitely deserves a place on this list. And I think it's kind of not that well known, so I feel more people should read this one. Then there's the Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood, published in 2005. This is the retelling of Penelope as she's waiting for her husband, Odysseus, who goes first to the Trojan War for 10 years and then spends another 10 years on his boat trying to get home. But it's from her perspective. Oh yeah, and she's dead. At the very beginning, she's like, it's her ghost in the underworld, and she's explaining, like her life. And also with her is this chorus of maids that Odysseus murders when he gets back home. And the chapters are interspersed between Penelope's sort of memories and her sort of subjective inner story, her inner monologues about how life was for her growing up as a princess and blah blah blah. And then there's the maids, who are like a kind of cabaret almost. They're funny, they're jokey, they're working class. They do these like songs and like kind of weird show numbers in between to tell the story. And apparently Margaret Atwood was modeling it on the chorus of the Greek tragedies, to have like a chorus of people to sort of guide the story. And so the interesting thing about this one is like the way that Penelope's story and the maid's version sort of play off of each other. This one's really short, it's like a novella, but it's like really like creative and like bursting with, I don't know, like energy in a way that a lot of Greek myth retellings aren't, because most Greek myth retellings are really focused on story, and like how to bring this story to life in a modern setting is the main idea, so storytelling and theme and so on and character. Whereas in the Penelopiad, the maids add this element of like kind of edge and like uncertainty and chaos, which is just really fun. Then in 2009 we have Ransom by David Malouf, I think that's how you say his name. And this is, I wasn't sure about whether to put this one on, because in a way I didn't like this book so much, but what I did really like about it is the way that it takes what the Greek tragedians did as its sort of storytelling method, which is to look at Greek myth and take just one event, one like really dramatic event, and then expand that and like look into the sort of psychological consequences and the characters involved and so on. And so what he did is he picked the moment when King Priam of Troy goes to see Achilles, who's murdered his son Hector, and begs for the body back, because Achilles is like kind of crazy and angry, and he doesn't want to give up the body of his slain enemy. and nemesis Hector, right? So yeah, I really like the format of just taking one event and then like going into that moment and kind of like exploring stuff. And the Achilles from Ransom is really interesting as well, because the writer makes a lot of the fact that he's the son of a sea goddess. So there's something about Achilles which is half immortal and half to do with the ocean, and he gets these sort of watery visions sometimes, which is like kind of at odds with the super macho fighting soldier Achilles that we know and love. So yeah, some of the psychology stuff was good in this. Some of the descriptions of like griddle cakes and like the small materialistic details that he uses to try and create the sense of being in ancient Greece or ancient Troy, I guess, was kind of boring for me sometimes. And you don't want to get bored in a really short book, because this is also quite a short book. But yeah, like the format is really interesting, and again, like I wish more Greek myth retellings did this kind of like super like narrow focus on one moment kind of retelling thingy. Yeah, for like the conception, the idea, and also for people who just want more Achilles content or want to see an interesting kind of Achilles, then I recommend this book. Speaking of Achilles, then we have like the ground zero of the recent boom, which is the 2011 Song of Achilles. As much as I really hated Circe by Madeline Miller, I really loved her first book, The Song of Achilles. This is the famous love story between Achilles and Patroclus. By using Patroclus, who is the lover of Achilles, as our narrator and a sort of like lovable soft boy with values which fit like modern values, and putting him like in the world of Greek mythology as a way for us to sort of like experience it, is a sort of genius thing that Madeline Miller came up with, and it works really perfectly. She retells loads of great stories. There's loads of flaws in it, sometimes like kind of sloppy writing or bad editing or something, just some weird turns of phrase and stuff like that, and also the depiction of women sometimes like made me feel a little weird, but basically it's a really good love story. And she also like thematically really gets at how do you update heroes, like Greek heroes who are like super big, tough, macho, murdering, raping men. How do you take that image of heroism and make it relevant for the modern day? And I think she like explores it properly, and especially at the end you can feel like her knowledge and her passion for the Greek myths really comes out in the writing. So yeah, it's a great one, and you'll cry probably, so what's not to love? Zooming forward to 2017, we have Home Fire by Camilla Shamsi. This is a straightforward retelling of the Antigone myth, especially like as done by Sophocles, but it's set in modern day Britain, or more like maybe like 2010s Britain, and it's exploring Islamophobia and the media culture and like the sort of traditional loyalty towards your family, which is in the original play, but like putting that in the context of being a Muslim in the UK, like in the time of ISIS and stuff like that. So in the original story, Antigone's brother Polynices like gets a foreign army and goes to war against her city of Thebes, and then is killed, and then his body is left to be desecrated by animals and, you know, not given the proper burial, but she defies the king and wants to bury him. So in this case, her brother is a fighter for ISIS, and obviously ISIS, you know, is against the West and all this stuff. And so then things kind of progress as they do in the Sophocles. The thing I find really impressive about this one is the way that it manages to follow the play like really to the T, like really like without going away from the source material, almost to a fault sometimes, because I felt I knew the characters already inside out and I kind of wanted a bit more from them. But the way that it does that, but at the same time feels like a completely modern story. Like you don't need to know anything about Greek myth to feel like you understand the story and like the themes that it's dealing with, and how they're relevant to this sort of period in the history of the West, and like how people had to sort of like decide their identities when it comes to allegiance. No, allegiance to your family and your culture and your traditions, or allegiance to the state that you have been, you know, that you're born into or that you're connected to, and how those two things are often like kind of made to be at odds with each other by politicians and stuff like that. Of all the ones I've talked about, this is the one I think which should be taught in schools, because it has the most to say about the world we live in now. This one is a bit of a stretch. This is At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop. The reason it's a bit of a stretch is because I've only found, like after a brief search online, I only found one other person who is convinced, like I am, that it's, you know, very much kind of drawing on Greek myths. Nowhere else have I seen it described as a Greek myth retelling, but for me it's so obviously retelling the story of Achilles and Patroclus that I wanted to include it on this list. And it's a good book anyways, so there you go, it's on the list. But yeah, this is about a Senegalese soldier who is in World War I. His name's Alpha, I think. And yeah, like they've gone there to World War One. They're fighting for France. They're like this group from Senegal and of like an African regiment. It kind of explores how they're treated by the French and stuff like that, and we get some colonialism stuff. And it's sort of filling like, I guess, a historical gap when it's talking about World War One stories by including like African soldiers. But the main, like the heart of the story is about Alpha's friend who gets killed, and then Alpha kind of goes crazy. This happens at the very beginning, and the whole thing is Alpha's sort of descent into madness. French title of the book is Frère d'âme, or like soul brother, and throughout the book he always talks about the guy, I forget the friend's name, his friend, as his more than brother. And like is repeated so many times, my more than brother, and it's obvious that he has this sort of intense, passionate relationship with him, which is non-romantic, non-homosexual, like the Achilles-Patroclus relationship is like more traditionally depicted as non-homosexual, although it's been done as both, right? Like not just Madeline Miller, there's also ancient sources who've depicted it as homosexual. But in any case, the heart of the story is that there's these two men, they love each other very dearly, one of them dies and the other one gets really angry and then starts butchering the enemy like kind of senselessly, and something changes in him, and it's this sort of psychological change which is one of the most interesting things about the Iliad and also about this book. It's not just the dehumanizing effects of war, although that's part of it, but it goes deeper than that. And yeah, like I feel like it's an update of the Achilles-Patroclus myth. If you want to hear me try and justify this more, then I have another video somewhere where I go into more detail about why I'm pretty sure that this is a Greek myth retelling. But anyway, moving on to 2021, Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I haven't read any of her recent ones. She's had 2 books since Ariadne, so I really need to get onto this. Like she did Electra, which I'm not so, I don't know, the Electra story I'm not so interested in because I've already read like a great version of Electra by Euripides and I just think it can't be topped. And also her whole family kind of thing, I've never been that interested in them. I'm more of a Thebes person rather than an Argos person, but anyway, different strokes for different folks. And then her third book is Atalanta, which I am really interested in reading because Atalanta is a character who I think you've just got so much like blank space to come up with stuff, but you can draw on what's already there to... Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Ariadne is the first book that Jennifer Saint wrote. It's her debut. It's the story of the Minoan Cretan princess who helps Theseus escape the Minotaur. There's this lottery after a war where Athens has to send a bunch of young people to Crete, where the young people get put into a labyrinth where there's the half bull, half man Minotaur, and it hunts them down and kills them all and eats them. But then Theseus, the prince, joins the group and with the help of Ariadne defeats the monster, and then with Ariadne escapes from her father's island and, you'd expect goes back home, they all live happily ever after, except of course they don't, because it's a Greek myth. Instead they get to an island and he just abandons her there. He is the worst. He abandons her on this island after everything she's done for him. She has no family, she's abandoned her home, she's abandoned her sister who she loves very much, and Theseus then marries that sister. So, and this was the thing that I really liked about Ariadne, that usually, I've never heard of the Phaedra story, Ariadne's sister, and Ariadne's story being told sort of connected together. But it would make sense because they're sisters, right? And like Ariadne falls in love with Theseus and then he, dumps her and takes her sister instead. So it makes sense to tell that story, I think, but I've never read it anywhere. I don't know if anyone else has told that story, like the sister story, in either modern or ancient retellings. So that's exciting and it's really good. I do think Phaedra kind of gets, like a bit of a rough deal towards the end. Her story is not as good as Ariadne's story, in this telling, I mean. But yeah, I like sibling stories. So I really like the way that Jennifer Saint, like kind of amplifies and draws on and explores the sibling side of things in this one, as well as Dionysus. Dionysus is a big, the Greek god of wine and madness and dancing and all that stuff. But yeah, the way she discusses his character is really interesting because he's he's one of the most interesting of the gods, definitely. The gods are often a bit two-dimensional, but he has got a lot going on. So that's it. Those are my books. Those are my recommendations for modern Greek myth retellings. Let me know what you think should have been on this list, unless it's Circe. But no, you can tell me if it's Circe. Try and convince me, try and convince me why Circe is actually good if you like. But there's lots of things out there that I haven't read yet as well. Like I said, I really want to read Atalanta especially. And there's a whole bunch they're just waiting for me to get into. So hopefully I can do this list again, maybe next year, maybe in a few years, and it will be quite different, or like with more books or something like that. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and let's chat in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye.